Hey everybody, this is Ben with NatureLink, and I want to welcome you to the FireKeepers Global Summit, in which we will gather for powerful conversations with cutting-edge experts and thought leaders who will guide you to connect to your truest self and activate your natural gifts. This event is designed to reinstate the importance of carrying our soul-directed vision back into our communities so that ourselves and our communities will flourish. Here you're invited to learn how to seek the guidance of your inner voice so that you can truly understand what it means to live life with purpose. We're welcoming Josh Lane to the call today. Josh is the author of the best-selling book, Conscious Nature, The Art of Neuroscience and Meditating in Nature. Josh has mentored and trained people of all ages around the world over the past 20 years in the inner and outer arts of mindful, whole being connection with nature. He is frequently seen practicing Tai Chi Chuan or playing various random string instruments, sleuthing forest mysteries, and generally mucking around on a little known fringe planet called Earth. I love that piece. Located somewhere on the western spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy. Josh brings forward a depth of experience from his journeys in the realms of ancient earth connection skills, Gong, and meditation, as well as his vision to help bridge the healing power of nature into the modern experience, enlivening creativity and well-being through a conscious, primal connection with the earth. Awesome. And I'm so excited to talk with you today, Josh, and about your subject where you've listed initiating the soul through meditation in the wilds, dialoguing with nature as your guide. And I guess the first question is, when you mention initiating the soul through your meditation in the wild, what is the intention in the context of like the nature piece that you mentioned there?
Well, first, I just want to thank you, Ben, for inviting me to be here, and greetings to everybody who's tuning in to the recording here today, and greetings from the Hudson River Valley here in New York State on a very cold, snowy day. And it's great to reconnect with you, Ben, and just thinking of that topic, initiating in nature, what that does. And rites of passage is a big topic in recent years in many circles. How can we deepen our connection with those aspects of ourselves that bring us to our gifts inside of us, that help us to face old wounds and old patterns and find healing and understanding, but also not just in the context of healing, but in the context of finding our highest creativity. You might say finding our soul's path, helping ourselves to root into nature so that our spirit can grow and reach up to the sky, you might say. And I think of initiation in these contexts as a force that stirs something inside of ourselves that helps us to realize what's already there, not necessarily putting something new into us, but helping us to recognize what we carry with us already that may be dormant or unnoticed, and to tend to this and bring this forward in our lives. And I see nature as a powerful vehicle through the elements, through the sensory connections, the imaginal connections that we form, as a way to celebrate and connect with these forces that are also inside of us. So what's happening around us in the world of nature, whether it's the power of a storm or the beautiful song of a robin chorus bursting forth on a spring morning, and the feeling that gives us, these things are happening around us, but they're also pointing at expressions inside of us, archetypes and energies that are moving in our own consciousness. And nature can be a reminder and an initiator, in a sense, of awakening us to what's also moving inside our inner world of nature. So that's just a little hint of what I'm aiming at there with that idea.
Yeah, I love that. And there's just so many like rich layers to what you're saying there. And yeah, we dove in deep right away.
Why not, right?
Yeah. So I can tell our speakers are probably watching this right now, saying, "Oh, this is about to be really deep." And when you use the word like initiating, which for some listeners, that can mean so many different things, like initiating the soul. And then when you're meditating, that it's like that dialogue that you're mentioning between your inner nature and your outer nature. But I also had like another question, like on the levels that you kind of mentioned. How does nature to you point towards like our own soulful path?
Okay. So there's a pattern I've seen that I became aware of in my early years of exploring nature connection as a teenager. I mean, I had already had some time as a younger child, getting out camping with my dad and doing some gardening with my grandparents and my mom and going on hikes. But when I was a teenager, I really started to explore wildlife tracking and wilderness survival, and just spending many hours wandering timelessly in the forest and really immersing myself in my senses. You could say getting out of my own thoughts about the world and just immersing what was coming in through the senses. And I noticed at that time that certain things would start to happen. I would cultivate a deep question, or a curiosity would start to build inside of me. For instance, I became really curious about red-tailed hawks, and I became aware they were in my neighborhood, started to learn about their songs, their calls, and I still hadn't seen one. I was like, oh, it would be great to have an encounter with this hawk. And now for weeks, I'm keeping my ears open because I've learned their sound, and I'm looking up in the sky all the time. And I'm just thinking, oh, it'd be so great to have this meaningful, really close encounter with a hawk like that. I wonder if that could happen, And all this time I'm out wandering in the forest, and I grew up in the suburbs in southern Connecticut, so I had to have to walk across town, go through the suburbs, and then get out to the edge of town, and there'd be a little park with a few acres of woods that I could explore in. And I remember sitting under a tree one day, just being there, and all of a sudden the red tail comes over and starts circling right over me, right a couple weeks after I started really deeply asking this question, just calling as loud as it could, psst, psst, and just screeching right up above me. And then I was like, wow, there's the red tail, and of course you're going to bump into a red tail if you're in a place with meadows and hunting areas. There's nothing too mysterious about that necessarily. But then I remember the next question was, I wonder what a red-tailed hawk tail feather looks like. It would be really cool just to be able to see one of those. Why did they call it a red tail? I'd love to really not just see it from a distance, but really see that feather. And now this started to kind of gnaw at me, and started to mull this question over and wonder, wow, what would that be like to get to really study that up close? And again, carrying this with me for a week or so and building the energy, curiosity around it. And at the time I was really practicing something one of my mentors, John Young, calls body radar, which is following your intuition, your instinct as you walk wherever you're going. It could be in the city, but in this case it was out on the deer trails that were in this park in the suburbs. And I'd be walking on the deer trails and noticing which way do I feel called to turn, just pausing a lot, getting into my senses, and just noticing little subtle pulls in the body. Like, okay, where is my instinct to take me right now? Is it over here? No, not that way. Over here, yes. And I remember I was walking very slowly, and right before I'd went in the woods, I'd had that question: could I find, a red-tailed hawk feather, just to study it, just to look at it, and just be in reverence and awe of this for a moment, have that connection. And I let it go, but I was walking in the woods, and I was doing a lot of peripheral vision where I was looking up at the horizon a lot, letting my eyes expand and just take in the whole view around me, and softly walking and pausing a lot to check in with that body radar, that intuition. And I remember at one point I was on a deer trail, and I could go right or left, and the way to the right made a lot more sense for where I wanted to go, but my body stopped and it felt like for some reason I had to go to the left, even though it was going to take me way out of my way. And I went down this forested hillside of oak trees and found myself coming to a place where an old stone wall was going through the forest, and there was a break in the wall that the deer trail went perfectly through. And I was looking up this whole time in my peripheral vision, and I just stopped. My body stopped all of a sudden, right when I got to the break in the stone wall. And I didn't know why. I was looking up, but my body stopped, and my awareness was tugged down to the ground. And there at the base of my feet was a red-tailed hawk feather of a tail feather, right? Just laying there perfectly. It had been recently molted. And there it was, and my body radar led me right to that. And of course you could say, well, that's a coincidence, if you're outside enough, you're going to bump into something like that. But I knew in that moment that it was a combination of things. There was this deep question that was forming, a deep curiosity kind of gnawing at me, like some deep part of myself wanted to have that connection, needed that connection with that red-tailed hawk for some reason. And following that, nurturing that curiosity, keeping that question growing, and then going out and just being open to what was there and pausing a lot to tune in with that and follow my instinct. And I really knew in that moment that all those things led to that encounter with that feather. And I just had some time to sit with that feather and be with it and just feel that connection with the hawk that day. And it was a really wonderful, mysterious thing. But that story kind of illustrates, going back to your original question, how nature helps kind of mirror the things that are inside of us, what we might call the deep yearnings of the soul. There was some part of me on a soul level that needed to have that encounter with that hawk. And that was just actually what I would learn over decades, 2 decades after that. That was just one of a series of encounters on a much longer string. If you look at each of those moments as a pearl, right, on a necklace, and there's a continuity there running across. So we might say is a deeper facet of the soul's yearning, that each of those moments is telling us something about ourself, about our potential, about our relationships with the bigger world of nature that we're part of. And that's just, still getting just at the beginning of what this means for me. But hopefully that helps illustrate that nature can, I feel, reflect back something that helps us look inside ourselves and discover something that's there waiting to be seen and expressed.
Yeah, it's so beautifully put. And you and I are actually, before the call, the speakers probably didn't know this, but we're talking about one of our other speakers, and I mentioned this in his interview from one of my mentors that kind of sums up what you're talking about. He would always, his name is Michael Jospe at Earth Base Institute, and he takes his knowledge from Tom Brown Jr., who you're talking about, who the lineage from Tom Brown to John Young to you, and then you and I both having that connection as well. And Michael would always say it's from a Tom Brown mindset of like, excuse me, we're all part of the spiritual consciousness, like this spiritual connection, like kind of what you're just saying, Josh. And then, but we're also all seeking like a deeper need. In your case, like that, your attunement and that question, like the need to know, with the hawk, which I love how you painted that context on that. So we're all part of the spiritual consciousness, but we're also all seeking a deeper need. And nature is the mirror and the answer to that deeper need within ourselves. So saying like nature has a question, but we're all connected. So when we ask nature as a person, we just have to remember like somebody else has a similar kind of question. So we're still like so connected in that kind of way. So the answer is not for us, in other words. I like how you kind of saying that, like you found the answer to that, but there's something much bigger, like a wholeness to that. And it's just nature just opens up so many like windows and mirrors that back in so many different ways. It's amazing.
Yeah, like for instance, in that story, right, there's the hawk itself and the encounter both with the being and with the feather, but the journey to get there for me to have that encounter, right? There's all this learning in all those pieces, each step of the way, the question, the story that led me to even think about the hawk, that's a whole other story. And then the question about the hawk, and then the sensory practices of expanding into the moment and following the body radar, right? Through the finding of that feather and many other things too. That's just one of a lot of other stories that are on that thread. It helped me to build confidence that that was even possible, that any of these things were possible, because I didn't grow up, hearing stories about any of that kind of stuff, that you could connect with the forest in that way or with nature in that way, and have these kinds of encounters, and that instinct that way was something even possible for us. And I'm just a kid who grew up playing video games, playing Nintendo all day, in the suburbs, and very quickly came to those kinds of experiences. So I know it's possible for all of us. It's something that we all have inside of us because we're part of nature. And I feel like part of the gift of that moment with that hawk was me coming to the realization that, hey, you know what, there's a bigger game going on here. There's a whole other communication happening that can help us figure out more about who we are and what we're capable of, and what we can bring into the world and experience. And that gave me the confidence to want to share these skills with other people so they could have their own experiences. And who knows what each person's going to find. It's going to be a different thing. They're going to have a different gift and experience from that. But I feel those as ripples that go out from that moment with that red tail.
Yeah. And Josh and I are actually laughing before the call about a red tail experience that I had. If y'all follow Josh on Instagram, he puts up these great little blurbs, nature connection, like, I can't remember what you called it, but moments. And it was just something casual that we miss, like when we're going into the woods and there's these signs. Some of us say omens, some of us say coincidences or signs and interactions that we're constantly missing because we're not attuned. And it was something that I noticed years ago outside my house, but then I kind of like forgot about it. And the video that I'm referring to, Josh was showing how to see gray squirrels marking trees when they come up and down in their territory for scent marking. And I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that before. Like casual person would be like, yeah, or I've seen that, or some people would be like, oh, I didn't know that, and go out and look for it. But in my case, like the ego took over. I'm like, oh, I've seen that before. And then when Josh showed the video, I was like, oh right, I always forget about that. And I was actually on a wander later that day, just kind of walking through the woods and casually glanced over. There's a marking on a tree. Instead of just walking by like every other day, just casually looked up, just through curiosity, and there's a red tail eating the squirrel up at the top of the tree. And so I was like, I wouldn't have seen that if I didn't, or I wouldn't have been reminded probably through that short blurb that Josh sent out there. Or maybe you never know. Like I could have looked up there and seen it and be like, oh, that's really cool. But humans are just kind of funny. Sometimes we need those simple reminders just to be like, wake up and pay attention. And so, yeah, I was saying for the listeners too, I was telling Josh, well, thank you for that moment, because I was reminded to, stop and just be still for a second for something that I, see all the time. So
Makes me wonder if the red tails pay attention to those vertical stripes on the trees too. Never thought about that before.
That's a good question. Yeah, and that makes me wonder too. We could probably go down an hour-long rabbit hole just on that. That could have been the overarching question. I did have another question too. You talked a little bit about like initiating a soul a little bit, and we can dive deeper into that too. But it seems like the word attunement has kind of come up And so for our listeners who aren't aware of like this word or like aren't aware of the attunement as much, my question would just be like, how can we begin to attune to nature's messages?
Mm. Well, that word attunement, I like to think of tuning forks, okay? And the idea of resonance. And if you have two guitars next to each other and you sound the A string on one of them, if they're tuned perfectly, the A string on the other guitar will start to vibrate even though you're nowhere near it. You're playing this one over here, but that frequency is causing the other string to vibrate. And I could think about this in the context of nature connection. The red tail, you could say, I hadn't awakened or initiated the resonance of that red tail in my consciousness yet until this moment. You know, it was kind of the potential was there. Like I'd heard about red-tailed hawks a little bit. Maybe I'd even seen a couple from a distance growing up as a kid. I kind of knew that they existed. So there was this little string of a frequency, you know, going on that was in there. But it was waiting to be woken up, you know. And then I heard a story about a red tail from a friend and I got inspired, wanted to see one. And then when I had that encounter, it was like, now the red tail thing, frequency that's in me, or that A string on the guitar, if you want to say, that was already in there. Now it's like, whoa, it's woken up. You know, I'm hearing the note of that red tail. So that's a way that we can start to be in attunement with nature, is to make nature important in our lives. And, you know, this has forever been the function of culture, in particularly in relationship to connection with the earth. Culture helping us through the stories that we grow up with, that we're immersed in, that help us focus on what's important in our lives. And I talk a lot more about this in the free audio that I'm making available to everybody here, Rewilding the Ecology of Our Imaginations. But just to give a little nugget on that, you know, think about the stories that we grow up with. Increasingly today, what is importance placed on? The stock market, or, you know, our favorite sports teams, whatever. These are all great things. But, you know, do we have the story of the red tail that hunts in the meadow behind our house? Do we have the story, you know, of the oak trees and the acorns? Are we immersed in this so that those are resonating in our consciousness enough that we pay attention to them and that they become part of our active story of our daily life? So attunement to me has to do with what we place importance on enough that we start to notice it and it becomes important to us. And that's one part, you know. So things you could do around that would be like, okay, you want to attune with the birds, keep a field guide on your desk, or your dinner table or whatever, and every week try to learn a new bird, you know. Some little attainable goal like that can go a long way. And then you're waking up that resonance inside yourself, like, okay, this week I'm going to learn about the chickadee that lives outside the door, and really, what do those patterns on their face look like, and what do their calls sound like? Wake that up. So there's that level of resonance and attunement where we are tuning ourselves to what's going on in our environment, and we're realizing our oneness with it that way. We start to realize that, oh, okay, you know, when I walk out the door, that gray squirrel is not just paying attention to the red tail, but he's watching me, right? And if I walk out the door in a hurry, that gray squirrel is going to run off, climb up the tree, maybe wag his tail. But if I really slowly open the door, just sink down in my energy, root myself for a minute, and then I just slowly walk out at a nice pace, and I don't really push my energy towards the squirrel or burst out the door, you know, he might continue feeding. So attuning also means realizing that we have an impact on the environment, right? We're not isolated from it, even from that environment in our backyard or front yard right out the door. It's all one. We're causing a reaction in our presence. So there's creating attunement through what we pay attention to. There's attunement through realizing that we have an impact and we're part of that story. And the third one I want to mention is, to even notice those things, we have to be present, right? We actually have to be there. Like if our mind is already 10 steps ahead to where we're going to be driving to next, when we walk from the door to the car, we're going to miss everything that's going on there. We're going to miss the squirrel. We might miss that the squirrel is barking and going, and if we're tuned in, okay, there's a red tail over there. He's not right here, but he's a little further off. We might miss all that and just get in our car and drive away. So the very first thing and the easiest thing to practice is just taking a moment periodically to just be present to right now. And I'd invite everybody to do that just for a moment, just to tune into the position of your body, just for a moment. Be aware of the earth beneath you, right? The earth is always here supporting us, and just relax into that for a moment. Like, oh, wow, here we are. Whether we're in the office somewhere or at our home or out in the woods, the earth is always there with us, right? And the sky is up above us and around the earth, that big field of space. Just to position ourselves, like here we are. And just to take a moment to just feel the subtle currents of air, whether you're outside in the breeze or even inside in a room, there can be little currents of air that you might feel just on the hairs on the back of your hand or side of your face, on your cheeks, the back of your neck. Just feel what the air is doing, right? And just take a deep breath and just breathe that in. Realize you're breathing in that nature of the air. And just notice how this brings you into the moment right here. And it could be that simple, right? Just taking a moment just to ask, what's going on right now? And I'd really invite everybody to do that. If you're, going to step out of your door to go to your car or walk or drive off somewhere, just take a moment as you step out the door to do this. Make that a routine. If you do that even a couple times a day, that starts to bring in a little potential for this attunement that we're talking about there.
Yeah, thank you. And just that short little grounding kind of brought me back. Not that I was out of the interview, but brought me back to the present. Oh, we're back. But yeah, like just I can totally agree with you, Josh, and that was so beautifully said. How just we're, as a human, we're just constantly going. We're always busy, and like those grounding moments, we kind of forget about. And I love how you're pulling in like those kind of part of those sacred questions, like what am I feeling right now? It's that big first one, but in a way that is bringing in mindfulness and like meditation as well as attunement, and like the word like intention kind of comes up for me too. Like just in my background, rites of passage work, intention is a pretty big loaded word. And so it's just kind of like, why are you here? Like, and then somebody would answer like, no, really, like, why are you here? Like, it's kind of the same thing. Like, no, really, why am I running out to the car and scaring the squirrel? And like, or why do I even, need to know why I'm scaring the squirrel? Or, and why am I even running out to the car? Like, I could just walked out to the car to get my phone that I left in the car. Like, why is this a big deal? Like, to go run anyway. Like, I'm on a little tangent there, but that's kind of, I can relate to that. Just saying like, we just need to have those moments and slow down and really just ground into like that main question, and what am I feeling right now? And instead of I would say like, instead of wanting to find meaning, just be in it. Like exactly what you're saying, like embodying that through meditation, that can be so powerful. And for our listeners, I'm sure a lot of you listening right now will be like, oh, that's easy. And then when we do it, we might do it a couple of times and then forget about it. Like the story I shared earlier, like, oh, I've gone by that tree many a times. Like, I don't need to look at it. And then I see the video, I'm like, oh, I should go look at it. And then boom, there's the red tail. So the stuff that we can be aware of and that we'll see it in ourselves and nature, it will just be leverage with that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. That you bring up an interesting thing there, that it's so easy for the mind to be satisfied with just a cursory experience. And then it's like, oh, I can label that. Okay, I got that. I'm done. On to the next thing. And also the mind searches for that meaning. So there's a sort of alchemy that takes place, you could say, with this process where when you allow yourself to drop into that space of presence again and again, the meaning, as just with that red tail, with these little moments of discovering the bird, finding the feather, many other things over many years, the meaning emerges through the being, right?
Mm.
Because I couldn't see all that in that moment, but now 20 years later, looking back, I see the thread of those experiences, that there is a meaning to it. But if I wasn't present in each of those moments, I would have missed all those magical things, and I wouldn't have been able to see that meaning. So there's an irony in it, but also an alchemy in the sense that we transform because we discover more and more the gift of being in that presence. So it's a cultivation that takes place.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The meaning, and you can rephrase that for the speakers, but the meaning is in the being, is what you said, which is like
Yeah.
that I can definitely relate to and understand. And that it's like it's like a demeaning process, not like demeanor, but like you're redoing like what it means to not find meaning in things. John Young, I know we'll talk about this, and I think Tom Brown's mentioned this a couple times. And this in my background, we do this with some of our participants in our programs, is how to walk through nature without labeling things and what that feels like. It's a really strange feeling. So like I'm sitting in this room, but it makes you approach it with curiosity and like embodying it. Instead of saying like, this is a whiteboard, be like, what is that? Like it's a square. Or like not even labeling this as square. It's just a weird thing. And it's like almost like you've never seen it before, like approaching something like you've the first time. So the first thing will come is like, people might see you as crazy. uh, but like I think our best teachers of like what you're just saying are like our kids, and like how we kind of like that's just what I was thinking about when you're saying that. I was thinking about children and how like they approach everything for the first time, like reinvigorating the child in us. And for those of you that have kids, like we're reminded of this all the time when you see your kids like getting really excited about something, and you're just like, it's just a chair in the living room. Why are they so excited about this? But they're like, it's like, cause it could be like the first time they're jumping on the chair. I just found out that my daughter just found out that she could jump from her bed down to like this little pillow. But she just found out how soft the pillow was. So it's like she's testing like her jumping. But it might have been the first time she's ever been jumping onto like this cushion, like, and that something like that, like, or that action. And so most parents, this kind of can relate to that, like would be like, oh, that's really dangerous, like don't do that, you'll hurt yourself. But and I found myself like trying to catch myself, and like, let's let her do this might be the first time she's experimenting with this action. So anyway, it's like I was just kind of relating to what you're saying, like that demeaning process. And it even like reminds me too of one of my mentors, Cater Brown. um, will he would always challenge us to walk to have like a question. Like if you're having a question, instead of trying to find the meaning, go through that demeaning process. So like something comes to you, like an action, something that happened to you, instead of trying to find meaning, embody it, like you're saying, Josh, like and not really devalue it, but like disembody it, and then walk through the landscape or walk throughout your day if you're in the city, and watch how people interact with you. And what's happening is like they're reflecting back what that answer is, and then pray about it if it's in the evening, or if you don't pray or meditate, the next day just ask the question, what what am I now guided, what actions am I now guided to take? And like, so like a lot of us don't give ourselves that time to really hold on to that. Like you're saying, like giving ourselves time to hold on to that embodiment and that feeling, because it's scary or it's too much. So yeah, that was a pretty loaded question I was asking you earlier, but I feel like you and I could talk a lot about that. And you do use, we've hinted a little bit on like how like your meditation and your techniques support this, and we haven't really dove into that. If you want to maybe
Yeah.
open up a little about that, like how does this dialogue with nature and everything that we've kind of talked about with initiation and attunement, like how does meditation help support this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting looking back on my book, Conscious Nature. The first of the 36 practices in the book, I believe, is what I call sponge awareness. And it's exactly what you just talked about, of letting go of the labels. And it's as simple as just sitting there. You could sit in the woods, wherever. You could do this right here in front of you, wherever you are, and just keep asking the question, what's here around me or within me? Either one's valid, maybe both. But what's here? What am I noticing? What am I noticing? And I've found over and over that if I do this for 5 or 10 minutes, like I've arrived at my meditation spot in the woods, my sit spot, and I'm just settling in, and I start to ask this, okay, what am I noticing? What am I noticing? And I might start close in around me and work my way further and further out. What am I noticing? That things pop out that I can't believe I didn't notice them, you know? Within 10 minutes, my sense of my surroundings and myself has expanded so much. And it's just from that one thing of being present. What's here? What am I missing? What's here? What's here? And it just brings us right there to the moment. So it can be that simple. That's one of my favorite ones. And I just think of it like, okay, I'm just a sponge. I'm just noticing, just being present, noticing. And that's pure simplicity. But with the meditation piece too, researching the neuroscience was really fascinating, because having mentored people for 20 years in wildlife tracking and reading nature's language, I just saw over and over these patterns of perception emerging, like as you ask a question. Just like with my red tail story, I started to ask questions about that red tail, and I went deeper into the experience of that being's world, right, and how I related to it. And you can see this happening when you mentor people, whether it's learning about the tracks that they're finding of a red fox or whatever. You know, at first that stuff's invisible. It's like it doesn't exist to them if it's not part of their awareness. It's not resonating yet. But with each question, they get deeper in, they see the tracks, and then they realize, oh, that fox is always in a side trot through here. I wonder why. You know, why is he not walking? Why is he in a side trot? Or, oh, there's always this scat over here full of raspberry seeds. Oh, maybe that's from the fox. And suddenly this world of the fox starts to emerge. It was always there, but now all these little resonances with the tracks, the gait pattern, the scat, the raspberry, all these things start to weave into a big holographic picture inside of the person's brain. And I became curious about these kinds of patterns while I was mentoring over the years. So I wanted to dive into the neuroscience and find out more about the mechanisms at play in the brain as this kind of resonance is awakened. And what I found with the meditation is one of the things that happens when we really still ourselves, and this can happen in movement too after we learn how to do this, but just being present, like with that sponge awareness of just being, noticing, and letting the senses expand out. When we focus that way, relaxedly, for about 10 minutes, our brain rhythms actually change. So the brain waves, they have these choppy beta waves when we're doing our daily to-do list. You know, I've got to do this, this, and this, and thinking about all these things, and the brain's jumping all over from topic to topic, which is important. It also helps us focus, doing a math equation or things like that. But when we do that, our attention circuits start to wear out. You know, if you're in that focus zone for so long with that hard focus of this to this to this, and it's ironic, it's focused, but it's also scattered sometimes. the beta waves start to kind of wear themselves out, and we start to get tired and we can't focus. But if we drop into our being and focus on that relaxedly, just coming back, okay, what's happening now? What does my body feel like now? What is the wind doing now? And just silently being aware of that. And still for about 10, 12 minutes, our whole body changes. We get a relaxation response that comes through. Our blood pressure drops. Our immune system boosts its function. And the brain actually shifts into that alpha rhythm, which is a bit slower than those beta waves. And large areas of the brain can synchronize in these alpha waves. And when you get whole brain synchrony in alpha, what it does is it powerfully resets your attention circuits. It refreshes. It's like some researchers have called the alpha waves sort of like windshield wipers on a car, right? And they're just clearing it so that you can see fresh, again, what's there. And it's letting go of those filters of, I think I have to do this. I think I have to do this. It's just letting it go and just being, here I am. Here I am. So meditation can do that. And nature is a wonderful place to meditate, just to be present to what's happening in our senses. And it could be that simple, but that powerful.
It's like that. I'm not sure who quoted it, but it's just like, it's just being. And like, oh, what does that even mean? Like, I'm just me. It's just being me. And like, and I love the sponge awareness. Like, that's great. But you should copyright that pretty quick, or people will start using it. I think that's really cool, like imagery, because yeah, like we're a sponge, but like, you know, as you're kind of saying, like the awareness and our alpha and beta waves, like it slowly starts to expand and it's like contracted again, like you were just saying. So the sponge is like, I couldn't think of it like an object so perfectly put in there. I love that sponge awareness.
I'm a big fan of kind of holistic awareness too. So you could say that's one aspect of it, the being present. When we do that, not to overly simplify, because I know the left brain, right brain thing has been overly simplified, but you could say in general that there are a lot of right brain functions happening when we're in that sponge awareness and we're seeing holisms, right? We're seeing spatial relationships and geometries and how things relate in the big picture. And when we take time to do that, we're really helping those functions wake up inside of ourselves. But when we ask questions, right, when we come back either at the beginning of that, like my red tail question, like what does a red tail sound like? What's it look like? What does a tail feather look like, right? Those are kind of the analytical parts that often relate to left brain function for many individuals. And when we come back from the experience of, okay, now I was walking in the woods, I was really being in my senses, expanding out into that holistic picture with some of that right brain focal function, expanding, unified field of focus, you could say. And then when I came back from it, I journaled, you know, like what happened. And I asked some deeper questions. You know, I went back to that kind of analytical part. So I like not just doing one of those, but bringing all of that together into a cohesive, integrated function where we're really honoring all the different ways of knowing that we have within us. And those are just a couple of them to touch on, but I think they each have a gift to offer.
Yeah. And like very visceral gifts, and which, and like also like simple simple interactions. These simple interactions we're having are giving you like such big gifts, like you're kind of hinting to. And there's so many of us are receiving these gifts all the time, and we like, oh, that was cool, and then kind of brush it off. But when you're more mindful of that, it's just such a more visceral experience. I love how you phrase that. And then like dropping into these meditative moments, which is so funny with meditation. I remember when I was kind of getting into meditation and trying to drop in these moments, you start it and it takes forever to get into those moments, like a couple of months, like really, like I remember the first time I was able to like really meditate for like 10 minutes and it was like a big deal. And then they're like, and you have all these people like, oh, I'm gonna reach enlightenment. I can meditate for like 30 minutes. I'm like, what are you getting out of it? It's like why? And like, so there's like that intention comes up again. But I love how you really phrase that and opens up that dialogue with nature through those mindful moments. And I'm sure by now a lot of the speakers are probably watching this and trying to Google your book. I would, at least. Like, what is, and like check it out, your book, or I've already read your book, which I personally have skimmed through your book, and it's just not only profound but really inspiring and empowering work. And it's just, we need more research like that out, more research in like a mindful way on how you present it. I feel like there's so much research on these subjects, but the way you're presenting it is a much more, like you said, like underneath one container, like it's all in like one package, which is to me like pretty amazing how you've formulated that. And since I guess since we're talking about the book, a question that I had about that was like where you explore neuroscience of meditating in nature, but particularly in the terms of integrating different ways of knowing what the brain is actually capable of. And I'm sure some of our listeners and myself are probably kind of wondering like this, if you can expound a little bit on that.
What the brain is capable of.
When it's in this dialogue with nature.
In the dialogue with nature, okay. I think I see where you're going with that. Let me see if I'm
I'll
on track.
rephrase that.
Yeah.
So like, because like somebody might a question like this, what is our brain capable of? That could probably end up in so many different answers. But you kind of explain in one section how the integration of different ways of dialogue that you've kind of we've talked about. And so when the brain's like being mirrored back in nature, if you can just expound a little bit on that, like what we're actually capable of when we receive that initiation.
Okay. When we attune mindfully, and not just mindfully, but let's say whole being wise, if we bring mindfulness to that space of, okay, just totally in the moment, in all the senses, attuned to what we're feeling inside, what we're carrying with us, and also what's happening around us, we start to realize this interrelationship. And I hinted at it before with when you walk out the door to go to your car or whatever, and if you're not dropped in and you're already 10 steps ahead in your mind, and you scare the squirrel away, and you don't notice that the squirrel was barking at that red-tailed hawk in the distance, right? That's one end of that spectrum. But when we are dropped in, we're in our senses and we've developed that relationship with a squirrel, and we know the difference in its sounds, like whether it's, really alarmed because there's something right there, or mildly alarmed because there's something in the distance, or it's just foraging and it's not alarmed. We have a relationship there, and we have a relationship with whatever it's alarming at, whether it's a cat or a hawk. And we have a relationship with the acorns or whatever, or the mushrooms, or whatever it is the squirrel's going after at that time of year. And we have a relationship with our senses to be able to detect that and know that we can do that. And it's important to us to do that, so we take the time to do it. Those are all pieces. But there's also the piece of what are we carrying with us? Are we 10 steps ahead when we walk out the door? Or are we valuing and curious about what's going to happen when we step out the door? So we've created a need to be present, to pay attention. That's important to us intrinsically. There's that. And then there's another part, which is how are we feeling in that moment, right? Like, did we just have something crazy happen, or are we really stressed or worried about something? And that's why we're going somewhere. When we are aware of what we're carrying, we might step out the door and realize that our body language, is broadcasting, right? The animals are picking up on that. The squirrel is picking up and like, whoa, that guy's walking out the door and he's got something going on. Animals are very attuned to the way we carry ourselves, the speed we move at, the way we hold our bodies, you might say the energy we broadcast. So all these pieces, right, they all play in how we're feeling, how we're moving, what we're paying attention to, what we're placing importance on, whether we recognize and feel connected to that larger story. When we account for all these things, suddenly the possibility opens up to a much greater degree that we can fully recognize our part of the story. That there is a story going on in nature. We're part of it. And we can take responsibility for ourselves within that to a certain degree. How do we carry ourselves? How do we honor the other beings around us, whether it's that squirrel outside the door or the people we're interacting with or ourselves? We can start to tend these relationships, and that may take a process. It's going to be a process, right? We could say that's a microcosm, that little story. We look at that on a whole cultural level of what's going on in the digital era, right? What's invisible to us? What aspects of nature are part of our imaginations, actively attuned, right? And not. And to me, simply becoming present, as simple as it is, just going to sit on your porch or whatever, or in the local park on a bench a couple times a week and just giving yourself 10 minutes to just be, watch the trees, listen to the birds, feel your body. This will awaken us to what's there. What's there may not always be comfortable because there may be things that need tending, and that's a whole other story, right? But just showing up is the first step, right? To see and feel what is there. And that starts to open that dialogue, because we can then ask questions. And just like with that hawk feather, answers will start to reflect back. That thread of those experiences will start to grow. But we have to be present each step of the way so that can happen. So hopefully that gets a little bit at your question there.
No, that was spot on. And thank you for expounding on that. And I feel like you not only answered the question, but summarized like into one package, like the whole question, the original subject itself of what we're even talking about. Like it was really well played with interweaved back in there. Because you and I know each other for a while, so I feel like we'll go down a ton of other rabbit holes if I kept asking you more questions. But instead of asking like another like summary type of question, is there anything like you feeling that we've left out today that you want to still add in? We come at the top of the hour, but we still got a couple minutes.
Well, one thing that's coming to me is, this topic of what's important to us, right? The things we place importance on, we pay attention to. As we pay attention to them, we grow in our relationship, and we become able to tend that relationship. So a great starting place would be to ask what's important to us in our personal connection to nature. That would be my invitation to everybody here. What connections are alive for you? Maybe they exist as stories right now. Maybe there's, like for me, that red tail, I'd heard about it growing up. Maybe I'd seen it in the distance, but it was a little point of curiosity that started to wake up. So my question would be, what are those for you right now, for the listener? Just take stock, go out, meditate in the woods, take a walk mindfully. I'd invite you just to think about that. What connections are waiting in the wings, you might say, to wake up that way, that might spark your curiosity? And take note of that and ask some questions, because when we ask questions, we cultivate curiosity. We actually start to create a chain of reactions in our brain, and we start to make a whole process that literally builds a life of its own. as we ask those questions. It builds momentum and it opens up experiences. So, sit with that, and also consider what connections are really alive and how might you tend those. Whether it's with a favorite tree you love to go to, maybe put an intention out there to get there this week and tend that connection, or a place that you really want to explore that you love, get back out there and set that intention. So that would be, I think, the main thing is how to actually bring this to life, because we've planted some seeds with the stories here. But the most important thing is that being, right? So how can you bring this into your being, into your experience now?
Beautiful. And I'm thinking for our listeners too, who don't have access to, getting out, and could you expound on this a little bit on if we're not joined to a green space, if I'm a speaker, watching this in an apartment right now and thinking well, when can I get out, and already making the schedule in my brain, then how could we be in these moments if we don't have that? Because there's still an option. If you could just expound a little bit on that.
Sure. Yeah.
That might be a pretty common question that might come up for people watching this.
Definitely. I've coached and mentored a lot of people who are, from an urban experience and they're living in the city. And what I do is I suggest that they, try to find, okay, where is the local city park that you could get out to? And even once a week, get out there and find a spot to sit, or just to develop your own mindfulness circuit. And there's a whole chapter in my book about actually creating a mindfulness circuit, a place where you walk. Maybe you already have a place like that, and just adding in a few moments intentionally as you walk. The other thing could be putting up a bird feeder on your window. And you can go to Audubon websites. National Audubon Society has great information on how to do that responsibly in a way that's good for the birds. But I also spent a lot of time actually addressing this question in the Rewilding Our Ecology of the Imagination audio. So you can check out that free download, and there will be more resources on how you can do that as well.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for expounding on that. Yeah, and I forgot actually about your audio, which is, listening to pieces of that is actually really great. And I'm laughing too. I was just actually reading a story of somebody whose sit spot was a friend of a friend, just in his journal that he's sent me on an email. And he has his balcony, that's his sit spot, and he put up his bird feeder, and peregrine falcon nailed a bird, which is probably one of the few people to see a peregrine falcon nail a bird off a feeder.
Wow.
And I was like, that's the best sit spot in the house right there. You've got nature interaction right at your doorstep, literally. So a lot of us are thinking oh, I have to go all the way out of the city for this place to be centered. And a lot of us, it's it's right here with us, and doesn't have to, it's not a physical place, it's us. And so how are we grounding, and how are we reflecting that on that landscape? It's I think you've mentioned this to me before too, as well as John, is become a walking sit spot. And which means you're walking, you're grounding as you walk, but also you're carrying that essence of what it is to be in the sit spot. So it's not really physical, and it's not even a thing or a label like we were talking about earlier. It's that essence of what it feels like, the energy of the day, which you've kind of talked a little bit about earlier as well. We're at the top of the hour, and we could spend. I wish we could spend another hour talking. That would be really wonderful. But I wanted to just give a quick plug to some other things before we end out our session here, because I think you kind of summarized the rest, the end of that really well. But I know you and I were talking before the call that you wanted to kind of somewhere in the call share something in the video with our speakers, and you mentioned something like a meditation. Would you still want to share that today?
Yeah, that would be a great way to wrap here.
Yeah, I thought it would be too.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'd invite everybody just to take a deep breath, and as you exhale, you could Keep your eyes open or closed, whatever you feel more comfortable with, but exhale and just sink into your bones, sink into your structure for a moment. Feel yourself, however you're positioned right now, just held by your bones, which are literally built from minerals that come from the earth. And I like to envision the bones as an extension of the earth. And take another breath in. As you exhale, just sink further down through your bones, through the floor, and feel the building itself connected to the earth and held by the earth, if you're indoors right now. And as you sit there, just feel the vastness of the earth expanding in your imagination and your felt sense, how big the earth is in all four directions around you to each horizon. I think at something like 13 miles, the eye can see where the curvature of the earth begins. If you were looking out to the horizon, just imagine that in your sight there, just where the earth starts to dip below the horizon out in each direction, how far that is. And the vastness of the mass of the earth actually beneath you. This is something I always like to return to throughout the day. I just take a moment to do an out breath like this and just relax anything I don't need and sink into that presence of the earth. And I find that it's very grounding to do this. So just this one thing on its own is very potent to do. And just one more breath like that, a deep breath in, and as you exhale, let go of anything you don't need and just imagine it composting in the earth, because the earth has this potent ability to transform and change, and that's one of its gifts as well. Just let go of what you don't need. And I'd invite you even to smile inwardly down to the earth, just with an inner smile of recognition for all the support and nourishment that the earth gives us each throughout our lives, really, every moment of our life. And this is a nice way to begin a sit spot or a meditation spot, just to have this recognition. And just feel for a moment and sense imaginally around you, out in all the directions, that you are surrounded by nature, that you are nature, that the air is moving across the land. And just imagine the closest tree to you, whether you're in the city or you're living deep in the wilderness. Just imagine right now, can you sense where is the closest tree? What's it doing right now? How is the breeze moving through its branches? What might the sound of that breeze be as it flows by the branches? Is it loud? Is it quiet? Is it barely moving? Just imagine for a moment what might be going on in that tree. Is there a bird or a squirrel? Maybe there's just a stillness there. And now just feel that stillness inside yourself for a moment, rooted to the earth, just like that tree. Sharing that connection with a tree, that way you're both rooted, supported by the earth. And I'd invite you just to slowly breathe in through your nose and just feel that in-breath of the air coming in, just like that air is moving across the branches of that tree. And just recognize that kinship that we share with trees that way as well, the air, how closely related we are with the air that way. And just take in a breath of air and just feel that life force of nature coming into you, that you're one with. You've never been separate from it. And just take a few breaths right now that way, just infusing yourself with that energy of nature for what you need to do today. Just feel that support from the earth and that fresh energy from nature filling you up. I invite you, as you do this, to inwardly smile to the trees, to the air. You sense that connection, that kinship with the life force that comes through the air that unites us as beings on this earth, with the trees and with the animals, many other beings. And as you sit here breathing in that life force of nature and supported by the earth, just to come back to your own center, maybe sense your heartbeat for a moment. Just imagine, if you can't feel it, just imagine that you can, but sense in there into your body, just sensing that flow of life there, and this feeling that you are nature and you are part of the river of nature's motion and stillness. Just smile to yourself in the midst of that, with your own creativity, your own soulful calling that will lead you through your curiosity towards your passion, towards your gifts, towards a greater mystery unfolding. And with that, we'll conclude our meditation here. And I always like to just move a little bit after a meditation, shake it out, stretch it a little bit, stomp my feet on the ground a little.
The old foot stomp.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. Oh, thank you for sharing that, Josh. That was, what a great way to end all of that, and end our conversation. So thank you. That was, I'm sure our speakers will really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for the chance to share and visit today.
Yeah, and thank you for agreeing to speak. I'm excited to share this with on our summit as well. And so this for the speakers, the listeners and watchers, viewers who are watching this video. Josh does have a free gift URL code, and like the free gift information and description, as well as his information, can be found on the summit landing page, as well as your free gift itself and the description, which I was wondering if you just wanted to expound on that instead of me reading it off to everybody, because you would probably do a better job.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I've put together about a 45-minute session, audio recording with some stories and practices that'll go a little deeper, on some of the things we touched on today, and what I call rewilding the ecology of our imagination. And it's about that process of attunement and bringing that importance, that direct relationship back with our environment, and some approaches for getting started on that. And there's also a PDF guidebook, 5 Ways to Rejuvenate in Nature, that give you just some really simple practices, but don't overlook them, because even though they're really simple, if you actually do them day in and day out, they will create that resonance, that attunement. So check that out. And that's also a way to stay in touch with what I'm doing through consciousnature.net. So yeah, be glad to have you check that out, and I hope you enjoy that.
Yeah, definitely stay in touch with Josh. His little short interactions are to me like the best. They're really wonderful. And once again, I was just saying, all this could be found on the landing page, as well as his video and his recording. Thanks once again, Josh, for talking with me today. And I guess we'll just close it out here. So many blessings to you. I really appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks, everybody.
Peace.